Now, one thing you're probably noticing is that each field appears on its own line in the dialog view. So we've got the first, middle, and last name fields all appearing consecutively but arranged vertically. And of course, the fields for these respective questions, the answer fields for these respective questions, extend all the way across the width of the dialog view. Now, functionally speaking, that's not going to affect the validity of those fields or the ability of a user to enter an answer. But you may want to shorten these answer fields a bit within a dialog. And one of the ways that we can do that is by placing all of these fields, in this case, the first, middle, and last name fields, on the same line in the interview. And we can do that by way of the layout tab within the dialog editor. So I've been on the properties tab, I've done a drag and drop of variables from the right hand side list into the left hand side contents window. I'm now going to go to the layout tab. And on the layout tab, I'll see each of the individual variables displayed as individual buttons. They're rather wide buttons, but these are buttons that you can manipulate via drag and drop. And in this case, what we can do is pull these two variables, these middle name and last name variables, onto the same line as the first name variable. So what I'm going to do with client middle name is I'm going to do a drag and drop. I'm going to start moving up and to the right. Eventually, I'm going to see kind of a bluish gray line, which of course is my drop indicator. If I were to drop right now, nothing would really change, but as I move up and to the right, eventually this horizontal line is going to turn into a small vertical line just to the right of the client first name variable. Now if I were to do a drag and drop, the middle name field is now on the same line as the first name field within the dialog view. And I could do the same thing with the last name variable. And now I have all three of those variables and their corresponding answer fields in the interview on the same line. You can have up to 3 variables on the same line in an interview. In this case, of course, it would be appropriate to have 3 variables on the same line. If you wanted to have just 2, you could also do that. You may want to pay attention to how these fields align in certain situations, depending on how small the dialog view is and the length of the different prompts that you might have for each of these fields. In the interview, you may find that these fields don't align and may not look all that great on the same line, but in this case, we're probably okay having all 3 of these on the same line. I could do the same thing with the city, state, and zip, which of course is how we often present that information when gathering it. So we could pull the state and zip variables onto the same line, again, just using a drag and drop method to do so. Well, I'm going to go ahead and click on OK here, and you can see now that client information is being presented as a separate dialog. Of course, we could still do more with this. What HotDocs has done with that default dialog is it's just removed those other client-related variables. We could take this a step further, again, by going back into the template, clicking on Component Manager, and creating a new dialog. So again, I'm going to click on this new component button, click on dialog, click on OK to get into the dialog editor. And this dialog here might be spouse information. So as I did before, I could go in to the right hand side section listing all the available components, find the spouse related variables I want to add to this dialog. So maybe I will go ahead and grab all of these variables that are analogous to the client-related variables that we gathered earlier. Again, doing a drag and drop from the right-hand side to the left-hand side. Now, if we were to take a look at the resulting interview, you can see there's now a separate spouse information dialog. We'll need to do the same sort of reorganization in the spouse information dialog that we did in client information. Once you've created a dialog component, you can right-click on that dialog component during a test assembly and quickly switch back to the dialog editor. And again, we could just go through and reorganize these variables using drag and drop. And now we have the spouse information variables isolated in a separate dialog. As we continue development of different dialog components, we can see in the interview how creation of those components will affect what's presented. So now that we've created two separate dialog components, our task would be to continue to organize different dialogues, taking these different questions that are still appearing in a default dialog, putting them in separate dialog components, and in so doing, we're refining the interview. We're making the interview easier to navigate. The user's going to have an easier time working through the different questions, the different dialogues that are presented, and this should result in a better, more efficient user experience.